So today we're going to be looking at one of the most misused and misunderstood verses in the Bible. And on the surface level, the misunderstanding is going to seem harmless and like no big deal, but it creates a lot of unnecessary burdens. It creates a lot of inconsistency, and it also plays an important, like it plays a big role in this, the meaning and kind of just tossing away of the Old Testament that so many Christian churches are guilty of, right? So we're going to be looking at Matthew 5:28, and this is the sermon or the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus was talking all these things, and we're going to read 27 and 28. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." This is a huge verse, huge verse. This is probably one of this has to be top 10 most discussed verses when it comes to your typical American church, right? Um, the biggest claim with this is that Jesus changed the standard. Jesus elevated the standard. Before, all that mattered were your actions, but now your thoughts matter. Now your intentions matter. And because of that, because we see Jesus here changing the Old Testament, so to speak, we can kind of say, well, the Old Testament is kind of not that important. Not only I'm going to look at the word woman here and the word lust, I'm going to be as thorough as possible, but I'm not going to take up 45 minutes, whatever. I want to be respectful of your time. I want you to pay attention throughout the whole video. But I have to be thorough because of the nature of the verse. Someone may look at this and say, well, you just want to do this, or they may try to say, well, you're changing words. You're changing words in the Bible and you're twisting the word. And I'm going to show without a shadow of a doubt that I can't be accused of that, because that's not the case. First off, any pastor, any Christian that claims that Jesus changed the standard when he said, do not commit adultery. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. They're wrong. Point blank, period. I understand that you may have been taught that. I understand that you may have told somebody that. So now your pride is in that because we don't like being wrong, especially when it comes to scripture. But that's absolutely false. This is the same thing that was already said in the Old Testament. This is actually the 10th commandment of the 10 commandments, if you paid attention. So let's go back to Deuteronomy 5:21. This is also repeated in Exodus 20:17. But if you go, let me just go to this passage in general. So chapter 5, where it spits off the 10 commandments, right? The 7th commandment is, you shall not commit adultery. What is adultery? Adultery is sleeping with a married woman. It's sleeping with another man, having sex with another man's wife. That is what adultery is. Two single people cannot commit adultery with each other. You actually cannot commit adultery with a single woman, regardless of the marital status of the man. A married man sleeping with a single woman is not adultery. Is it still sin? Yes, because it is still fornication. It is still fornication. So no one is trying to say that married men can sleep around with as many people as they want to. No, it's still fornication, but it's not adultery. Those two things matter. Anyone who says that's just semantics, no. Those two things matter big time, just because of the emphasis placed on adultery throughout the Bible. And if you call that adultery, then you're making the Bible inconsistent in other areas. That's why these things matter. So the seventh commandment is already, you shall not commit adultery. You shall not sleep with your neighbor's wife, right? The 8th commandment is, you shall not steal. These are actions. You actually steal. You actually commit adultery by you actually sleep with your neighbor's wife. These are actions. These are the things that a lot of Christians try to claim that, oh, this is what the Old Testament preached. Only actions. No. The Jews at that time was only focusing on actions, because human nature is to focus on things that are outward, right? Outward proofs of who we are, right? Things we can be rewarded for, or things that we can be punished for. However, that is not the only thing. God never only focused on those things, because you have the 9th commandment, which is, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And then you have the 10th commandment. Now, we already been told in the 7th and 8th, do not commit adultery and do not steal. This is the 10th commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or field, or his manservant or maidservant, or his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Why not? Because if you covet your neighbor's wife, you're probably going to end up committing adultery with her. If you covet your neighbor's belongings, his ox, donkey, anything that belongs to him, you're probably going to end up trying to steal it. But if God doesn't care about your thoughts and your heart already, he only cares about the actions, then the 10th commandment is completely unnecessary. The only reason it matters if you covet these things is because you're most likely going to try to possess them, right? Sinfully possess them, because they already belong to your neighbor. They already belong to another man, right? So when we go back to Matthew 5:28, and I'm going to focus in on 28 here. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Let's get 27 as well. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Yes, you have heard that. They were focusing on the adultery part. Why? Because if you committed adultery, you got stoned to death. You and the woman you committed adultery with, both you guys got stoned. If I just thought to myself, I want to sleep with this woman, I gave her compliments, I checked in on her, I did all this slick stuff that people do, right? I linger around as her friend, knowing for a fact that if she gave me the opportunity to sleep with her at some point, that I would. I don't get points because I just didn't have the ability. I wasn't attractive enough, or she wasn't a snake enough, or whatever, to actually sleep with her because I intended on sleeping with her. That's still a sin. So imagine like you have two guys who both want to sleep with somebody's wife. One guy is super attractive. He has game. He has this, whatever. He has what the girl is looking for. This guy doesn't. This guy isn't a better man than this man just because he wasn't able to sleep with her. That doesn't make any logical sense. Both has, because this guy still broke the 10th commandment because he coveted after his neighbor's wife. This guy broke the 10th commandment, which led to him breaking the 7th commandment because he coveted the neighbor's wife and then he actually committed adultery with her. But both have broken the 10th commandment. So the Jews were focusing on their actions at the time. Because if I coveted after my neighbor's wife but never slept with her, guess what my punishment was? 0. It was a clear punishment for breaking the 8th commandment. You shall not steal. You shall not steal. That's all it was. I wasn't gonna say steal from your neighbor, but you shall not steal, right? If you stole an ox or a donkey or a maidservant or those things, then there were clear. It was outlined in the Old Testament in the law what you would do. You would have to pay it back. I mean, it was multiple laws, right? And there was also a clear punishment for committing adultery, which is you got stoned to death. You're dead. That's it. However, everyone who broke the 10th commandment, there was no clear punishment for it. So which one are people going to focus on? I just saw a man get stoned by 20 people, by the village or whatever. Or this man here, I know he's kind of being slick. I kind of think I know what he's doing. He's lingering around, but there's nothing you can really do about it. So they was focusing on that. Jesus was reminding them, it does not stop there. It does not stop there. And then you say, well, that doesn't make any sense, Alonzo, because when I look at Deuteronomy 5, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. That's not what Matthew 28 says. Matthew 28 says that, let me try to read it. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Two words that are very important here. The word woman and the word lust. Very important. They're saying the same exact thing as the 10th commandment. You just can't see it because you don't understand that the word woman and wife are the same exact word. And the word lust, covet, desire, all those words are the same exact words. It's not a changing of the words. It's just how to translate it. It's translator discretion of which version of the word they want to use. Sometimes when you're going from one language to the other, anyone who's bilingual can tell you this, that one language may have a word that we have 3 words for, and one language may have a word that we don't necessarily have a word for, so we have to use the next closest thing. That can happen, right? So, or they may have multiple words that just means one word for us. Like how we have heatu and idios. Both of them mean just own in the English language. But in Greek, they mean 2 different things. That's most likely a separate video, right? So let's go to the Greek here. And fortunately, I use BibleHub.com, as you guys can see, because I'm screen recording right now. And you can go to the concordance, the use of Strong's concordance, and when you click on it, it shows you the definition, what it means. And then when you click on it, it takes you to other verses. It takes you to other verses that where that word is also used, right? So first thing we'll look at is woman. Now the word here translated woman, it says a woman, wife, my lady. Probably from the base of Genome, I'm probably butchering that. It says a woman, specially a wife. Specially a wife. That makes sense. That's very consistent with the rest of like what the rest of the Bible has said. Somehow, some way we've convinced men that if you desire a woman, a single woman, you have committed adultery. That is so far from the truth, and that is a big deal because you're unnecessarily placing a burden on this man or multiple men. And not only that, but once you combine it with other lies, the place you get is very logically inconsistent, right? A lot of people say, oh, you can divorce your partner based on adultery. Well, you can divorce your partner based on adultery, and this is adultery. Almost no pastor is going to agree with that. I guarantee you, if a woman went to her pastor and said to him, well, I caught my husband at the gym looking at this woman's butt. He did a double take, right? So it wasn't just passing glance. He did a double take and was like, "Oh, I'm getting divorced from him now." That's not ordained by God, right? I mean, women don't divorce, like wives can't divorce husbands, anyways. Biblically speaking, again, that's a whole nother topic. I'm going with the assumption that most people have is they can for matters of adultery, and or simply what it would be biblically is sexual immorality, fornication, kind of umbrella term. But almost all of a sudden, it's a different category of adultery now. You have teenagers who think, well, I can't stop lusting after girls. I might as well have sex with them because it's all the same thing, anyways. And then you say that's so illogical. You can't think that way, but based on your thing that it's adultery, anyways. And then you take it to the next level of, well, sin is sin. All sin is equal. All sin is the same, which is completely unbiblical, right? I mean, that's just not true at all. Why not? You can try to finagle your way out of this all you want to, but it's impossible based on your understanding of the verse, based on the claim that you're making, right? So you have a woman here. So a woman can mean wife. It's the same word. This word here that it translates to a woman can mean wife. Especially once we realize that it say commit adultery with, and all throughout the Bible, the only person you can Jesus is talking to a bunch of Jews. He's gonna use words they understand. If he just meant sexual immorality, he would have said fornication. If he wanted it to be a new anybody can do it, anybody whatever. No, that's not what he used. He used adultery. You can only commit adultery with a married woman. That is it. That is what adultery is. Sleeping with your neighbor's wife. That is adultery. You cannot take a current definition of a word and read it back and read the current definition, the modern definition, back into the Bible and change what the Bible is saying. The Bible is very clear. Adultery is a man, married or single, sleeping with a married woman. There has never been a case of adultery where the woman was not already married. You cannot commit adultery with a single woman. Okay. Let's look at the word that they translate to lust. To lust after her, has already committed adultery with her. It says it in the definition, guys. To long for, covet, lust after, set the heart upon. Long for. They use the word covet in the definition. I'm not changing words. When you go to woman, it already has wife, and it says specially a wife. When you go to lust after, it says covet. And let's go to the word that they use, 528. Now, in our English context, different words have different connotations, even though they're all the same word. Covet, desire, and lust, right? You'll also see long for, longing, all those things, right? All really mean the same thing, because they all come from the same word. If I'm talking about Jesus, I would never use the word covet. If I'm talking about the disciples, if I'm talking about good righteous men, I'm not going to use the word covet. I'm not even going to use the word lust. Most likely, I'm going to use desire, right? Because it's a different connotation. It's communicating something slightly different. But we have to understand that in the Greek, it's all the same word. It's all the same word. in the context of wanting to have sex with another man's wife. Rather you use long for, desire, covet, or lust, it's all still bad. It's all still bad. Okay. So this is 528. This is a verse that we're going over already. Matthew 13:17. And righteous men desired to see. They're not going to covet to see. They desired to see. Okay. Luke 15. And he was longing to be fed out of. I'm not going to read the full verse of every single verse. Luke 17:22. You will long, you shall desire. Even amongst the same verses, you still have different translations using different words. Luke 22:15. Desire, desire, desire. Acts 20:33. I have coveted no one's silver. I have coveted no man's silver. Romans 7:7. Had not said you shall not covet. This is just quoting the Old Testament, which Paul does often. Romans 13:9. You shall not steal. You shall not covet. Some verse say you will not steal. You will not lust. Again, because they're the same word. They're not wrong for doing it. In 1 Corinthians 10:6, you got craved, lusted, and desired there. Desire, lusteth. I know I'm being repetitive, but because I'm making a claim that goes against what most people have been taught, I want to make sure I'm being as thorough as possible. And it's not really hard to be thorough with the Bible if you really care about the truth, right? So let's go back to the verse and let's read it as I feel like I've proven it can be read. But I tell you that anyone who looks after a married woman to covet after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's just the 10th commandment. You shall not covet after your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet after a married woman. Your neighbor's wife is a married woman. That's I don't think that's that complicated, guys. And it's not anything new. It was already said. He was just putting their attention back to it doesn't just stop at your actions. The claim that God only cared about actions in the Old Testament and did not care about the heart at all is blasphemous. You should not be saying that because it is not true. The entire 10th commandment shows that God cares about your heart, your intentions, what you want to do, what you desire to do. And if you wrongly desire to possess something that does not belong to you, that is a sin. It's always been the case. Let's look at Proverbs 6:25. This is Proverbs. That is Old Testament. Look what it says. Now, let me just go to chapter 6 so you guys can kind of see beforehand. So I can read 24 and 20. Yep, 24 and 25. To keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not lust in your heart for her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For the levy of the prostitute is poverty, and the adulteress preys upon your very life. Then it goes on. Can a man embrace fire and his clothes not be burnt? Can a man walk on hot coals without scorching his feet? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. Now, I can go over the law and all those things. I probably will go in a different video that shows that adultery is always with a married woman. But here it's talking about the adulteress, and then it talks about another man's wife. That's what adultery is, sleeping with a already married woman. Now, Alonzo, why does this matter? Why does this matter? You shouldn't lust after single women either. This and the third. You will lust after single women. Before you got married, you lusted after her. Paul said it is better to marry than to burn with passion or burn with lust or whatever, right? If the lust part was automatically a sin, lust after any woman, you don't fix it by getting married, right? Like it's the lusting after a married woman. If the lusting after a single woman was a problem, he'll tell you to repent of that sin, fix that, and then get married, right? No, if you're lusting after her, you're gonna probably eventually commit sexual immorality with her. So you might as well just go ahead and get married. Lusting after a single woman is not a sin. Now it helps to think biblically, and it helps to not lust after anyone in the logical sense of if you're not in a state of lust, you can make better decisions, right? So if you're not lusting after a woman, and let's say you're courting her, you're dating her beforehand, then when red flags pop up, when certain things pop up, you can look at it more logically, and you may be able to say, you know what, we're not ready for this, or you're not ready for this. Let me distance myself from you, right? This is not the best idea. But if all you're thinking about is, as soon as I get married, I just want to get married so I can have sex. I just want to get married so I can have sex. You're not going to be making as logical of a decision as possible. But that goes into wisdom. That's not a sin. We have to be careful about things that we call sin, because that is not adultery. That is not adultery. It's really that simple. That is not adultery. It's not fornication. It's not anything. It's you're sexually attracted to another woman. So this also causes people to think that the Old Testament, this just fuels the belief that the Old Testament isn't that relevant in our life, even though Paul says that all scripture is good for teaching and rebuking. And when he wrote that, the only scripture was the Old Testament. But then you have people talking about the Old Testament is not relevant, the Old Testament is not important, the Old Testament, that's God kind of, the New Testament is what's important. That's just not a supported belief. The people you're reading in the Old Testament, the main two people you read are the writings of Paul, and you read the teachings of Jesus. Neither one of them would have agreed with you that what was written in the Old Testament, or the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Tanakh, none of them would have agreed with you in that statement. It's such a stupid statement. So, yeah, I just want to go over Matthew 5:28, because I don't want to go on too long. So I'm trying to just get my thoughts out. I'm doing this in one take. But yeah. I mean, if anyone has a question about it, obviously, I mean, a few of you guys on DM me on Instagram before, kind of just ask me whatever. But I'm not changing words. I'm changing English words, right? I mean, because the Bible not written in English, it's written in Greek. And the meaning of the Greek, woman and wife means the same thing. Desire, lust, long for, covet mean the same thing. So, and then you can only commit adultery. And then the fact that it even says adultery should already show you that it's talking about a married woman. It just gives more support for that, because it will have just used sexual immorality or fornication. Adultery is never, ever, ever used talking about single people. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not even used talking about married men, right? Because in the Old Testament, God has put people to death for adultery, about to kill people for adultery unless they repented, all those things, yet he supported men have multiple wives. You're making God contradictory, because again, you're taking your Western beliefs about certain words and their definitions and things like that, and you're reading it back into the Bible. You're changing the Bible based on your culture. You're not determining your culture based on what you read from the Bible. That's just a recipe for disaster. And hopefully this video here, because the reason I want to choose this one as well was because most people have, if you're watching this video, you've heard something about this before. Dig into the Greek. Stop taking other people's words, even if the teacher makes you feel good. Or like some people use this to say, well, the standard is so high. That's why we need Jesus and his grace and this and the third. Stop it. You can communicate that we need God's grace without making up sense. The Bible talks about in Acts 10 or 15, I believe it was 10, but it's one of those. I always get those mixed up. When the apostles were debating on what to tell the new converts, right? What to tell new converts. They mentioned that it is not ideal to place an unnecessary burden on them, right? That is not good. It must have been 15. That must have been with the vision. The vision that people use to say we can eat pork now, which maybe we can. That's something I've already discussed. I believe it was this. Yep. 15. Acts 15, verse 10. Okay. Now then, why do you test God by placing on the necks of the disciples a yoke that neither we nor our fathers have been able to bear? Right? And there's probably other places in the Bible where it talks about burdens and placing burdens and following the traditions of men and following the laws of men and all those things. So hopefully I showed that hopefully I've encouraged you, because that verse in particular, hopefully it doesn't affect any one of your lives too much, right? Hopefully that's something that really is always important. That's cool information to know, but it's not going to be suddenly life changing on a large scale. The whole church, you're preaching to multiple people. Yes, it matters. But hopefully that encouraged you to let me look at the Greek. Let me just not just trust because the Bible is inspired, translations are not. And the translators do a great job a lot of times. Translating it to woman isn't necessarily wrong. Translating it to lust isn't wrong. But at the same time, you can see how it completely changes that if we put married woman or wife and then we put covet, even though they mean the same thing, they're the same words, now this theology of Jesus changed the standard, he elevated the standard, isn't really preached no more. And we just say he was reminding them, he was putting their attention off of the 7th and 8th Testament. Well, he was extending it from the 7th and 8th Testament, or the 7th Testament, commandment, I keep saying testament, the 7th commandment, and reminding them that the 10th commandment is also a commandment. So that's all for today, and thank you.